creation, especially in the visual arts, you really can't top what God's created. I mean, it's kind of a dumb statement. But the one exception might be music. When you hear a great piece by Bach or Brahms or Sibelius, and that is man-made. So I think, but it does touch a higher sense of beauty, I think, spiritually. We were at the symphony just this last weekend. Who did we see? It was Fabio. What was he playing though? It was Rachmaninoff, right? And there's a second movement, and the start of it was so beautiful. I was thinking of what it's like to enter heaven, right? Because when my daughter was married and I walked her down the aisle, I felt like I was entering heaven. And I'd never had that experience before, because this was down at Zion, and the horns were blowing, and the organ was loud, and people were standing. And I wasn't afraid. I wasn't nervous or afraid for my daughter, but just walking into that. But that second movement, it just was transcendent. So I think that's the one exception is with music, that you have this sense of beauty that might be, man-made.
I wonder, I'll just push back on you both of you a little bit. The thing is you're doing more with art than just recording historically what the sunset looked like, right? And it's maybe a little bit more exaggerated in John's work, but you're sticking you're putting modern buildings, next to the Magnificat or whatever. You're interpreting things and juxtapositioning things, like you said. Well, this could maybe happen, but most of it couldn't. There is something there that I think is worth commenting on, that art can do that beyond what our own observation would do. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's totally fair. The issue with the buildings too, there are Dutch painters who've done that too, like the Merode altarpiece, where they had the Dutch patrons or the Flemish patrons outside the window of that era. So, having, biblical events happen in the current time is kind of a transcendent thing. But, I think, as I mentioned in my talk, you just have so much freedom on a piece of paper or a canvas. You can create worlds. The American painter Wayne Thiebaud, who died a couple of years ago, he said the same thing. He almost made a reference like you were God with a small g, but you do have this total freedom to create something that can look absolutely three-dimensional, and it's all, a flat surface. It's just totally flat as a pancake. So it's all kind of a magic trick in a sense too.
Also, right, supernatural things. You had Michael, killing that. You made that up.
Right. So it's interesting being, for lack of a better term, a sacred artist or a painter of sacred things. You have one chance, and it's like you can do anything you want. So there's part of me, and part of it is the function of the piece. What's it for? What is it going to do? Who's it going to, where is it going to hang, and all that. You have one chance, and it's like you can do anything you want. What are you going to do? That's the real question. That really drives me, I guess. There are some things that I feel really uncomfortable painting, and maybe it's a personal thing. Maybe it's just out of not respect. Respect isn't the right word. For example, images of heaven. I don't like to do that, because I don't like to this is what it's going to look like, because it's no matter, it's a losing game. No matter what I paint, it's going to pale. It's and I've seen some pretty great images of heaven painted by different artists. It's like, man, that's not quite good enough.
All right. Does anybody besides Jonathan Shaw have a question? Joy?
I have several.
You can ask one.
I'm going to ask two. The first one was just comment on that, like you're saying that God is better, he's better at doing things, but isn't nature itself also broken, right? So theoretically, he did do and will in the future, however we want to put it, a lot better than already what we can see. So maybe your creation could approximate, the beauties of broken creation. You know what I mean? I just want your comment on that. But the second was, we've had some difficulties at the school with the teaching of our students and we teach our students to do beautiful and classic artwork in the school, but there's been some difficulty in entering that into the broader art world, which really loves ugliness. And, so for example, competitions that students, are enrolled in, they're competing with artworks that are very ugly, but sometimes technically proficient. So I wonder if you have any comments about creating an ecosystem for nurturing Christian art, from the primary level all the way up in a world in which like the prizes, the focus, the kind of thrust of the art world is anti-Christian.
The first question was about, what was the first question? Nature, yeah. Oh, right. It's fallen nature. Yeah, I think that's why in certain works, like you idealize. You can idealize things. You can make them perfect, even though they're not. I mean, that's why you use symmetry, or you can round things up to be more idealized. And regarding the education thing, I think there are two different things. With students who are very young, I think it's kind of tough to thrust them into the role of making art. Hello?
I don't know what's wrong with
Wait, it's working now. To make art, I mean, I think it's just enough to teach them how to see and how to draw and just to respond to the world around them, so that they develop skills. So they develop a vocabulary, they have skills, they can communicate. Because I think that's hard enough to do for college students. But for children, I think I would just encourage them to observe and to record, to work on building skills. And not that they're going to become virtuosos, but you could, into that, include more personal interpretations. I'm not sure what you mean by ugly art or.
So, for example, this spring, the kids were at an art competition, and they were competing against very, very stylized and well done pictures of skulls, or like blood dripping out of corpses and things like that. Yeah, so, and those were awarded maybe because of their technical skill, but there wasn't. So and our students are not trying to glorify ugliness and horrible things. And I'm not talking about memento mori. I'm talking about kind of some graphic, or there were demons, there were all kinds of things going on that you're thinking, it was just kind of hard for our students and their teacher to think, if we're competing with this, should we change to be more like it? Are we doing something wrong here? And how do you I guess, live as a Christian in the kind of art world and try to seek what is good when there's very little kind of support for that in other places?
Yeah, well, I think you just be true to yourself. I think you don't change your calling, be true to that. And you can always find competitions that are more spiritually based. Also, the thing about competitions, we all entered competitions. You can have your best piece rejected from one show and win a prize in another. It's all at the caprice of the juror. So I would take that with a grain of salt. I don't know if you want to answer.
I would add to be careful with the word competition. As Christians, we do what we want. I mean, we proclaim the gospel as we can. And the world's going to come up with crap. I mean, it's just the way of the world, So don't think that you can compete with it or should, or, we only do what we do. We can't have. I could spend all kinds of time, kind of complaining or, trying to put down stuff that isn't worthy. But I'm wasting my time. I should be just spending all my energy in doing what I do. We don't have time to mess with it. Yeah, we know what's some of the stuff out there, and I'm not just talking art, there's lots of bad stuff out there, but what are you going to do? Just say that's bad, that's bad, that's bad, or are you going to make something good? One thing I would add about the education thing, and I know, okay, so I'm trying to teach these skills, but I'm no educator, and one interesting thing I found, I ran across a book when I was in college that talked about the the development in the arts among children worldwide. What's interesting is kids, it's not like music. Music, it seems like you can, they can play scales and, just progress. Kids with art around the globe, they all draw the same. It's all on stick figures, and they go through these little development things. So don't expect them, unless they're, a prodigy or something. They will not, they're not going to produce, stuff that's Michelangelo. They just won't. They'll do what little kid drawings, and they get to a certain age, and they sort of things morph and change, and their culture starts coming into play, and maybe when they're high school, college, then there's something to play with there. But until then, they're just kids. It's like trying to, you can't force a kid who wants to have recess to play Major League Baseball. It's not going to happen.
I'm thinking about the tension in art between the subjective and the objective, and of course, beauty is a thing of the Lord, as we know from Psalm 27, and the Lord himself, as you pointed out, is an artist. On the other radical side of that, there's the notion that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I'd say that maybe there's a grain of truth in that, but I'd be curious to hear how each of you as artists would respond to that radical notion that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because it's only a little bit true, but how would you draw the line? How would you ferret that out?
Okay, again, it goes to the function of the piece for me personally. Let me tell you a story about this. Okay, so one time I entered this competition, and as a rule, I hate competitions. It's like, I'm up against, stuff that I don't really like and blah, blah, blah. So this one year, I took a metal and glass frame. I opened it up. I emptied my garbage can and I crammed it in there without thinking. I just jammed it in there. Put it back together. Gave it the title, Ibid, So What? It took 2 awards. And some people can say, well, you did sort of a Dada thing, kind of like, you really were thinking about it. I'm like, no, I wasn't thinking. I was trying to make, I wasn't even trying to do anything. I wasn't trying to make it ugly. I just emptied my trash, and there you go. So I'm a little jaded in my answer. I'm going to say, whatever.
Regarding the beauty in the eye of the beholder, I think it always comes back to the individual to train their eye to look for beauty, to see beauty. It comes back, the responsibility is on the individual. I'm amazed at how many people don't even see the world around them, or don't give a rip about art. Have you ever walked into somebody's home and they have blank walls? I don't get it. I can't understand, you're just looking at bare walls all day. So I think the average person, I don't think they think about art. So if beauty is in their eye, they've got the lowest perspective possible. But you train your eye. As students, you train your eye to see things, to draw what you see versus what you're imagining, and then your perception skills actually get better. And likewise, if you look at the world around you, if you look at history of art, you really elevate your eye, so to speak. So if beauty is in the eye, it's upon the owner to train and to educate and to enrich that eye, that personal vision.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to respond to her question a little bit about how do we make an ecosystem, and how would Lutherans connect Lucas Cranach, Albrecht Dürer? So that might connect more with classical, with what you're talking about, with Otto Dix, who we saw yesterday. And Dr. Scare talked about distress. Give us this day our daily bread. We're saying it rudely because we're in distress. Otto Dix seems to have that awkwardness, that life force of distress. His art looks really rude to me. But how do we we receive grace. We receive the scriptures with all their apparent contradictions, their mystery. How can we be receptive to art so that we have this ecosystem where we can discern what's maybe more beautiful in Otto Dix than a photographic representation with mad skills. And I'm not trying to downplay the lifetime it takes to gain those skills, but what else is there that we as Lutherans can cultivate around ourselves? And your students are probably cultivating an audience, all the people you three are teaching. Well, you know, it's hard to slow people down so they'll look and just hold that strangeness. So that's kind of a very rambling question, but.
Well, that's a tough one. In defense of Otto Dix, though, I think historically German Expressionism has a place, and I like it quite a bit. You know, it is guttural. It is, you know, you can use the term crude, but I think there's a toughness considering the subject matter. People went through the war, you know, Second World War. They saw things firsthand, even the First World War, and you know, life changes you. So you're not always going to have, you know, hearts and flowers and beautiful rainbows. And, you know, there are people, you know, like monks scream. You know, there are things that display a reality that you can't see, or emotions, experiences, and I think that's perfectly valid. I think it just goes back to the individual, but you know, everyone has such a different life experience. I think it's dangerous if you try to homogenize everyone's art, make it all the same. I'm not a fan. I like some photorealism, what you were describing, but I had a student working that way, and I said, why don't you just print that? Why don't you just print the photograph? You know, I don't see any merit in being just photographically accurate. I think there's an irony. There are artists in the 70s who work that way, but I'm more for seeing the hand, because think about it. If everyone signed their name, every signature would be different. Everybody makes marks differently. There's something unique to the individual. That's what I want to see.
What I would say to both of you, you said Lutheranism. So that immediately, yeah, I think of Cranach, yeah, I think of Hrehov. So, and beyond that, and I don't even throw me in the mix. Go for the good stuff, but you do have to be careful about, for instance, okay, I mean, there's oodles of great Roman Catholic artists, for instance, but you have to be careful. Well, you have to be careful. The same goes, you know, you go the other way, and you say, oh, this is a beautiful picture, a painting of Christ. And if you look closely, maybe it's a Mormon piece of art. And you start going down that road, there's some freaky, weird stuff in there. You know, it's like the heresy just like, it'll knock you over. So I would say for children, you know, show them the best. You know, there's gobs of detail within those pieces, you know, especially Cranach, and everything, you know. Explain to them what it is. It's kind of sad if you show them a piece and you don't, you know, bring it to life. I mean, yeah, it takes homework on your part. You have to like research, oh, what is this? What is this? What is well, so yeah, it's a hard problem, and the fact is, yeah, there's a place for you know, the other stuff. I mean, you can't, just because you don't like it, you can't say it didn't exist, right? And in some ways, they all affect each successive, you know, period of art. So there's that too. So, but I don't know. That answer your question? Yeah.
Yes, Mrs. Toga.
Kind of on that same line, have you found that struggle with representations of Mary? I found so many really interesting representations of Mary in the Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, and there's the side of me that thinks, oh well, that's those are some interesting concepts to put together, and then there's the other side where my Lutheran senses start going off, and I'm not sure if if Mary's being held up appropriately or.
Right. My experience is there is certainly some confusion, put it that way. So there's this thing where Mary is crowned often, and it bothers me when she's given a bigger crown than Jesus. I mean, it's like, okay, you're already in a bad direction there. But there's also this idea of the crowned woman, which is not, technically you're not talking about Mary, you're talking about the church. And that's been represented throughout history. So, yeah, Roman Catholics are going to say, well, that's Mary. And so you have to start splitting some hairs there. Yeah, I get nervous. Yes, she obviously was, she's beloved, and scripture points to that, but, it's like, okay, don't put her up on such a high pedestal, especially when it's like, oh, there's Jesus off to the side.
How about commenting on the idea that maybe the church should be the patroness of the arts?
The patroness? Well, I think I think if you look at during the Renaissance, the church and the Medici were great patrons of the arts. And, that stopped at a certain point. There was a 20th century artist who called the university the Medici of today that supports, that's why people went into teaching like me. But, it's up to churches. I'm glad my church gave me a commission and that they valued somebody who makes art. So I guess it comes back to and Redeemer. I think it just comes back. Are you talking about the church in general or the church individual?
I mean, I guess I meant the church more generally. It feels like the church is the patroness of the supply catalog, And yeah.
Yeah, well, you can certainly keep doing what you're doing, but I think a conference like this hopefully will maybe kindle a fire, and churches can go back and see what they can do. I've been talking to our friend Jeff, and I have a painting. I'm going to just give them to him and say, here, you need some art, take it. That's a start.
Never should have.
Yeah, I think that, I've dealt with enough commissions and churches, and my family, like I said, I was raised in a Lutheran church, so I know how churches, congregations, I should say, how they work, the financial stress and all that, and I totally get, if it's a choice between artwork and a new roof, it's the new roof. I mean, and times today are not what they were when, Rome obviously has deep pockets, they still do, so what are you going to do? But yes, this conference helps. Yeah.
With the rise in AI technology, I feel like we're approaching a time where you just type in, we want a picture of with these elements, and it would produce something like that. What do humans offer, like, as a unique part to artwork where we would still want to differentiate from, like, AI artwork, I guess?
Thank you for bringing that up, because it is becoming the biggest thorn in my side. Every time I see it on Facebook, and people going, oh, isn't this wonderful? I'm thinking, would you look at that? Yeah, you formed the face of Jesus from Sweden. But if you've taken the hands off of something and mashed it over there. AI is not, please don't do it. Just don't do it. For one thing, you're taking work out of, like maybe my pocket and other Christian artists' pockets. And really, artificial intelligence, when it comes to art at least, it's real stupid. It's not artificial intelligence.
Yeah, with AI, I mean, I've seen interesting videos done. I haven't seen many paintings done, but I can imagine images, digital images that you just print out. But it's fast and easy and cheap. I mean, And I can see where somebody would find that appealing if they just don't want to support the arts. But I mean, you're gonna have to bleed a little to buy art. I mean, it costs money. You know, you're supporting the artists, but you're buying original work. You're supporting the arts, but you're getting something that's one of a kind, that the artist, trained for, and kind of giving birth this wonderful piece that hopefully still has value. I think it goes back to, families. Are you hanging artwork? Are you collecting art? Are you encouraging art, original art? What do you have in your homes? So I'll push it back to the families.
Jonathan?
So you mentioned writ large, people are art illiterate. They don't recognize or don't consider art. What would be your recommendation if adults were wanting to increase their art vocabulary, right? To be able to improve their knowledge or recognition of art, to train that eye to see beauty? Where would we can discuss children? We can kind of try to encourage a culture where they're exposed to art. But for adults, where would you start if someone were wanting to increase their art literacy?
I'm just going to start this by saying, find a very good art museum. That is an excellent place to start. And drag the kids along if they're allowed.
Yeah, I was going to second that. Where do you live?
Next door.
So you live in Fort Wayne. Chicago's 3 hours away. Detroit is 2.5 hours away. Toledo is a fabulous museum, 90 minutes away. My hometown of Cleveland is about 3.5 hours. These are day trips. I would just go. DIA is fabulous, Detroit. But they're all day trips. And you go and you see them in person. You can see brushstrokes. You can see scale. You can see masterpieces like Seurat's Le Grand Jatte and Hopper's Nighthawks. And buy a print and then hang it up at home and talk about it. It's that simple. Just go look at the real thing. But you're in a great position to go look at it too.
I think kind of relating to the AI question, but also getting at the question of, pursuing excellence or masterpieces, and, how often in art or music or even in preaching are we trying to imitate something, but it's not our individual voice, it's not our actual own stroke. And how do we encourage sort of like embracing the journey or embracing the process, not being focused on the product so much? And is that how we get away from what AI produces? Is that how we have stuff that's more genuine, whether it's visual art, whether it's music, whether it's preaching or writing a sermon or writing something? Could you talk about that from a visual art standpoint or comments on any of that?
Well, I think all artists strive for excellence. And the masterpiece idea is kind of a myth. You don't know. I mean, you do aim high. You aim high. You don't always reach it. But I think all artists, who are really committed, do the best they can. I don't know how to add to that.
Maybe to add to it, so I have a music background. Something I've realized is so often we're used to having masterpieces of music on our phone we can listen to, but we don't sit and listen to someone play a piano or listen to a child play music and embracing what it means to have something that's not a virtuoso, that's not a masterpiece, and yet we're seeing or hearing or listening to a poem, hearing it being made, hearing it being produced, just that act of creating. I think about from music because I think about how much I love local open mics where you actually have people going and sharing music. You're actually listening to someone produce something. You're not listening to a digital recording of your favorite artist, but to actually uplift the arts in that way where each person should pursue excellence relative to their ability. But at the end of the day, it's not a competition. It's not about the top 10 hits. It's about creativity in general, or I don't know, beauty and the local level, I guess.
One of the things I like to do with my interns, although admittedly I've done it precious little, is have them watch me work. You can learn a whole lot because there's real struggle, when you work on your stuff. It's not like, the old Walt Disney opening thing where the brush goes over and it's all beautiful. I use my eraser far more than I use the pencil. There's a lot of correcting because we live this side of paradise, and stuff was messed up, including my hand-eye coordination and everything else, you know, so that part of it, the point is, I do it in spite of all that. I can't help myself.
Yeah, I wanted to respond a little bit to, or ask you to respond to this. I was really intrigued how both of you talked about really being compelled to create artwork. And I mean, I think a lot of us in this room are compelled to preach. One of the things I've had to watch in the last 24 years is men who are compelled to preach. They have the inner call, but they've been disqualified from the ministry. And they have to sort of suffer under this burden of not being able to do it anymore. So that's kind of interesting how it is a kind of burden. But the other thing is that I think in Gottesdienst, we don't articulate this, I don't think. But one of the things that I think we've tried to model, wanted to model, thinking particularly Pastor Fabricius and Pastor Eckert, you know, the way that Fabricius's articles on the back of Gottesdienst, right? And coming to a more allegorical, poetical, and deeper reading of Scripture. And I've been working on that some for a while too. And how do we help men read the Bible more deeply, right? And it occurred to me this morning when you guys were going over this that, like, I think actually thinking about art and the visual stuff might be a way to sort of, I don't know if you've thought about that. I think it's also, there's one more thing and I'll let you respond, but I think it's hilarious how humble both of you are, almost to the point of being insecure about your opinions. Like, you're like, well, I'm not a theologian, but look, you're 100% right on that parable. And you know, your instincts on this are right, and you there's no reason for you to be insecure. There's a reason to be humble. There's no reason to be insecure. But can you just respond to that?
No. Well, I'll just touch on a brief part of what you said. Yesterday, David Scare was an inspiration. You know, just the way he was just taking off on the passages of Matthew and the images. And, you know, he was just going on and on. So he definitely found inspiration. And he mentioned that. He said that he goes out, he wants to see art, he wants to hear music. So I think it's, you know, garbage in, garbage out. What are you taking into your life? What are you exposing yourself to? And, you know, regarding the question about supporting the local arts, you know, we just renewed our subscription to the Philharmonic here because we want to hear live music. We just want to support the arts too. You know, they need supporting. I'm not getting a kickback from them though.
To your comment about theologians, so it's interesting. Once upon a time, I can't remember the context, but someone said, "Oh, your congregation must love you," and I had to respond, "I'm not a pastor." And another time, someone said, "Well, you're you know, something about a theologian." And I thought, I'm not and then I stopped. And it's like, you know, in one sense, I think we all are theologians. You know, you really do have to dig into it. And what a blessing, it's been a blessing to me, you know, working on, it's just the fact that I do this work now, that I'm forced to stick my nose into Scripture. It's like, you know, I'm trying to, I was talking to someone, just a simple thing is, okay, what color was the robe that Christ was wearing? Well, here it says red, or here it says scarlet, here it says purple, here it says beautiful. And I'm thinking, well, the outside world would say it contradicts itself. Me, I'm like, oh, it's pointing to something. What does it remind me of? It kind of reminds me of the curtain of the tabernacle, behind which is the Holy of Holies. So my visual brain goes in these places that I feel blessed, like some people may not even think that way. Because I'm an oddball artist, I have to think this way.
Seth.
I have two questions. I want to ask them separately. I was going to ask this one second, but based upon what you just said, Pastor Peterson, I want to follow up that you both suggest that you're not theologians. I think, Ed, you corrected yourself and said, I am, sort of. Because you both admit that, and the humility and maybe even insecurity, which I think some pastors could learn. I speak of myself, okay? How do you feel about theologians, professional theologians, men as pastors, making theological assumptions about your art and teaching those things based upon your representations?
Assuming they're correct theologically, because sometimes that's above my bid grade, if they can use it, fantastic. And I've had pastors say, oh, I like this about it, and originally I didn't, it wasn't, I didn't intend it one way or the other, and it's like, oh, okay, sure, that works for me. I guess I'm not like, I guess I'm not like some artist who, this is what I mean about it, this needs to, it's like, whatever. I'm more of a, if my art can't speak for itself, then I've failed. So if the pastor or theologian picks up on it, fantastic.
Yeah, in the instances where it's happened for me, it's an honor if a pastor could use an image. I think Pastor Cage has used my sign at Jonah to teach communicants about baptism at St. Paul's. And Pastor Geese told me that he just used my heaven on earth for confirmation. Yeah, that's an honor. It's incredible. You have no idea. I think when we do these things, all you can do is do it in faith. That's the one thing that hasn't been brought up. But it takes a lot of faith to be an artist, because you work in silence, you work in solitude, you hope and pray that somebody's going to use this. You're not going to get rich, that's a myth. We both have jobs, or I teach, but it's a passion. I love being an artist. I'm honored to be an artist. You can't know the feeling of putting marks down and making something come alive. That's amazing. So we're the ones who are really blessed. And if anybody can use that, especially for God's glory, hallelujah.
That dovetails in my second question.
Okay.
I'm blanking how I want to phrase this, sorry. You work silently, you work privately, you're soft-spoken, humble men, and yet your art, all art, is inherently a public confession. And so I'm wondering how you view not only your art in that way, but also as the West becomes uglier in its art and more antagonistic toward Christianity, how you might view suffering as a Christian representative to and in the process of making your art.
So, to answer that, when I was talking about art projects, it comes out, very. When I was at Art Prize, the one person said, "Well, this doesn't belong here." By that time, I had a pretty thick skin. Artists, they just have to, right? But yeah, I guess that's. By the time that came along, I was like, whatever. She's going to say whatever she wants, and I understand that the world is going to say some, worse things. So, whatever. You just have to do what you do. I don't think it's any different than any other Christian and their vocation. You do it as you do it, and hopefully, you try to do the best. You try to confess when you can. Take the dead mic. I could give you this other one. Seems like a little more.
Well, piggybacking on what Ed said, if you enter competitions or grants, Christian artists probably are not going to get NEA grants, because even NEA or Guggenheim grants or things, they're so radicalized that unless you have a really strong leftist agenda, you're not going to get a grant. You're not, you're not going to be recognized. So it is controlled. So I wouldn't just depend on that. So it could be a form of persecution, if you want to call it that. But the arts just keeps rolling on. You're just, you keep hoping that you're producing fruit of some kind.
I struggle with, is there a place to see beauty in some of the modern things that we call, I've heard, people throwing around ugly, right?
Yeah.
Are there schools of artwork that you think are oppressive and detrimental to people that we should be avoiding? Where's the line between trying to see beauty in things and saying this is not helpful?
Yeah, I don't dislike abstract art. Actually, I like a lot of abstract art. And if you look in the 50s, the abstract expressionists, my wife Nancy and I were just watching films on the New York School and Franz Klein and Jackson Pollock. And those paintings are balanced in terms of designs. They may be void of personal narrative or all that other things. But when you get into the 90s and 2000s, I'll go into museums and scratch my head. There are installation pieces that are just either meaningless to me, or works that are trying to be blatantly offensive or overly sexualized. So I think, if you go back, if you want safe places, they're the Impressionists, they're Pre-Raphaelites. They're people whose work are very safe to look at if you're thinking about your family.
For any guidance, I take the kids to the Art Museum.
Yeah.
And lots of times, the whole left side of the place, I'm like, yeah, that just doesn't sit well with me, right?
What is it? Is it the content, or is it just too abstract?
I don't know. I'm looking for, is there some validity to what I'm sensing, or am I just not willing to?
Well, I think that's a good way of saying it. There's a willingness to learn and to look and to at least do some reading on the artist's work, what they're trying to say. You can always read the placard. I'm not a placard reader in museums, but people are placard readers. I think that's the best way to assess it, to judge it, to see what it's really about.
Yeah, I would underscore that. Normally I'm the kind of guy who says, okay, the art should speak for itself if it can, and that saying that sort of leans toward the representational end of things. However, having the interns here, I'm trying to expose them to some of the stuff that I normally wouldn't like, and I'm finding, much against my own better judgment, it really helps to do some research. Where are they coming from? What are they trying to say? If they're trying to say something stupid, then no. But if they're striving for their own sort of beauty, and it looks a little different, give it a second chance, maybe. Today's stuff, there's all kinds of crap out there, and I'm using a nice word. It's, go to any, modern art competition and see what people are. They are just some mean, troubled folks out there who are using art as a means to, just vomit all over the world. It's just the way it is.
The Fort Wayne Museum of Art has a lot of younger curators, and you have to, it's just, I think it's sort of a hit and miss. In my experience, I go to many of the shows, but I will say the print and drawing gallery, do you know that small gallery? If you're looking at something for your kids to see for drawing and two-dimensional art, Sachi Rizzo has a really great collection in there, and she's very responsive to, she will even pull things out of the drawers if you had specific things that you wanted to, subjects or something you wanted to bring out. That's a very solid collection, reliably so.
Yes.
We've been recreating like the same scenes in history for a long time, like the crucifixion or the nativity or something like that. And many artists have rendered it in their own ways. I guess what compels artists to keep recreating those scenes? Do you think you're going to find something different in it or displayed in a different way? I guess, why do we keep going back to some of these same scenes sometimes?
Well, because we're asked to. For one thing. And we can't help it, like I try to teach my students and some of their assignments reflected this. It's like, okay, you have no portfolio as artists. And you're targeting churches, specifically Lutheran churches. What are you going to put in there? It's going to be the same, I don't want to say same old, it's going to be the same beautiful things. As Christian artists, we can't help but do that stuff. If we learn something new along the way, fine, and if it looks like someone else's, that's fine too. Ultimately, it's through our own hands, so it's not gonna, I couldn't even begin, even if I tried to look like some other artist, it's gonna look like I did. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's, the world, if you think of all the garbage that's being dumped into, galleries and stuff, it's like, well, we need to change the mix on this. We need to pump our own stuff into it, really.
Yeah, the subject matter stays the same. The art, should be different. I like the analogy of it's like baseball, because in baseball, they play against history. They compare their stats to the people who came before them. So they're playing against the ghosts of, the greats. And artists do the same thing. You look back at Rembrandt, how he did the Gospels, or Caravaggio, and you try to elevate or you try to compete mentally to that kind of a level. But you do have this history of comparison. That's the beauty of art too. I had a teacher once who said all art was comparison, which gets to be an interesting thing because you start comparing, different nativity scenes, different crucifixions. And so you're playing against history. So it is, that sense of where do I rank and how can I compete with the big boys?
I just have to add that it's even worse for preachers. We haven't had any new material in a very long time.
You stole my thunder. No, it's true. I like to use the word artistic forebear. These are guys who came before me. I didn't have to come up with the idea of a circle being a representation of eternity. I didn't, someone did that for me. Someone did a lot of stuff for me. They all did it wonderfully. I guess to some degree, I'm their student. I can only, I wasn't there at the crucifixion. I can sort of imagine, and I have this whole, host, this mental library of images that I've seen, and I beg and borrow and steal from all of them, I guess.
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing. It's like the analogy I used of the stool. So there's the technical, there's the historical, and there's the personal. So you're always, you're dealing with the historical all the time. So you're always competing against that.
Would you relate it like, pastors, we don't just read Luther sermons, we write sermons for our context. Dogmatics, we continue to write new dogmatic books dealing with the same material for our time. So likewise with your art, yes, you're doing the crucifixion, but perhaps you're wanting to lean in more sacramentally because of where we're at in the church today. Or do you think that way as you're creating some of these sacred pieces about things that you're hearing from your pastors or you're hearing in the church today that will be something new or important for our time? Is that something that you maybe intuitively do? Do you actively think about that?
Well, when I've done work that was more liturgical, I think first of all, it's always going to be new because it's somebody else doing it. And the importance, I don't know. I don't know if you can gauge that, but you just try to stay true to yourself and to the subject matter. But I do have faith in the individual that, the artist who's serious about it, that they're going to bring a unique perspective to, if it's a gospel text or if it's something sacramental. I think everything has merit.
To a certain extent, I don't like to use like modern clothing and stuff. Sure. Even though, like the Renaissance people probably did that very thing. Right. There are some things that I pull, the chalice and the baptismal font. That I didn't invent that. That's old, and I like it. It's confessional, so I'm gonna steal it whenever I want.
it's easy. Well, not easy, but it's sort of the concept comes easier for you, for the artist perhaps, to depict something from the Gospels or the Old Testaments, because these are describing events that happened. But I don't know if you can talk about some work that you've actually done. But if you take something like the epistles of Paul and where he's describing more abstract things and not necessarily using a historical event to illustrate it, is that something you've ever worked on, you've ever tried to work on, or something that's been asked of you? And how have you gone about it?
Honestly, I don't think I've gotten that far just because there are so many things, just the life of Christ. I mean, think of all the images that could be done and I haven't done. To get into more the more the mental part, I don't have time, I guess.
I mean, I don't think you should. I mean, we can't separate doctrine from the life of Christ.
Right.
I mean,
I'm not saying one should. I'm just saying, how does one depict those abstractions?
There are these
concrete.
those law gospel paintings that like Chronic did and others did. You know what I'm talking about? That's sort of, isn't it? I don't know. Is that?
I remember a painting. I think it was by Holbein, but it's the allegory of the Old and New Testaments.
Yeah.
There's lots going on in that painting, but when one of them it's like this sort of shriveled up old man. He's very pale and everything, and then the I guess the subscription under it is well, it's in Latin, but it's Romans 7. Who will deliver me from the body of this death? Right, and so something like that is what I'm trying to get at.
Well, maybe I have done something like that. I think of one piece that I've done that has no figures in it. It's just a big stone. It looks sort of vaguely like a headstone, but it's not. And the only thing on it, the title of the piece is "Oh, That My Words Were Written." And I kind of took that as I read through Job, and it's like, he wants this written. So I thought, I'm gonna write it for you. So I made it look like his words are carved into stone. That's all that it is. So I guess, in a way that's, it's not the life of Christ. And, but as far as like allegory, I have a hard time with that. I'd rather just cut to the chase and tell the story. I mean, I don't like to veil my stuff that way. I mean, that's just my personal preference.
And on follow-up, a few years ago, I gave a talk at the Good Shepherd Institute on my bulletin drawings, and I had to break it down, and there were certain passages that I couldn't use pictures for, so I did use words. So it was the introduction of words as symbols and words into, because there was just no other way to depict. I can't, pull one out of the air, but the use of words, is what I fell on. Jeff?
Doesn't the center panel have?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, Romans 5. That's a good example.
No time for you, Nuss. All right. Last question. Paul.
Art draws us upward and it moves me, I think most of us, to a sense of joy, a sense of thanksgiving. And in that respect, it seems very first article. Our Lord has given us our eyes, ears, all our members, our reason, all our senses, still takes care of them. He does that through art in part. But picking up on Pastor Peterson's commendation of both of you as really being preachers, I'm wondering to what extent we can also recognize that our Lord does use art in a third article way to call, gather, enlighten, sanctify, and keep us. I mean, clearly a bell calls us to worship. The architect who builds a sanctuary gathers us. What would you say you think about as a Christian artist about ways in which you yourself are moved to want to sanctify, to enlighten, to keep us, and what would you say gratifies you as you see people receiving your art and seeing that happen?
So, yeah, it's, the stories, it's the idea that I don't always plan what I do, I just do it. And then later on, you hear these stories of people they're deeply moved. And it's a weird feeling. I mean, the first time I got that response, I felt I had screwed up in a painting. It's like, what did I do? This woman's coming over to me with tears in her eyes. And yet she said, well, I'm so glad you put that in there. That meant a lot to me. And it's like, I wasn't even thinking of it. I didn't know it. I just thought to myself. So a lot of this is not my own, well, most of it is not my own doing, okay? And it's wonderful that effect happens. That, just doing my thing and doodling or whatever, slapping some paint on a thing, that you create this illusion and people gaining some higher understanding or just, not the fact that we have to be so emotional, but the fact that it does create that emotion. It's like, I guess I'm doing something right. I still have to ask that question of myself. I guess I'm doing it right. I don't know. And that's cool. That's it's nice to be, it's nice to be counted as a tool, some kind of tool, no matter how ugly it is or, misshapen or whatever, in the Lord's toolbox. I mean, that's cool.
Just one last thing, and yeah, you mean art? I think it was the beginning of my talk. Art can be expressive, but it can be communication. That you can still communicate through art. It's still viable. It's still valuable, and hopefully, it's still accessible for all.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed this.